Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, depending on where you are. And welcome to a final session for this academic year for our Rebellious Research Seminar Series. Now, I always say it's very special, but this one is particularly close to my heart because what we have today is, or whom we have today rather, is Francisco Mazza, who is my PhD student who helped me with the very first sessions and seminar series over 4 years ago right now. And now he's obviously finished his PhD, he landed an amazing job, and he's about to start supervising his own PhDs very soon. So it's an absolutely wonderful pleasure to introduce Francisco, who's going to be talking about his PhD project and hopefully a little bit about his PhD experience as well. And the reason I really love the idea of this session, because the first reason I started this seminar series was to help potential PhD students who are working with creative practice research. So obviously Francisco was helping me with that, and I was the obvious reason why to talk about things like that. And then we kind of came full circle right now. So it's just really exciting to introduce you, Francisco. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen, and the next hour is yours.
Thank you, Agatha. I'm just going to share my screen first, and then we'll get started just to make sure. 1 second, everything's okay. Include sound. Yeah. Right. So everything okay?
It's perfect.
Right. So thank you so much, Agatha. Hello, everyone. Before starting this presentation, I'd like to really thank you, Agatha, for inviting me to talk today. As you mentioned, so coming back, I think 2022, 5 years ago. Wow. We invited me to do my first presentation was in the beginning of my PhD, and you asked me to do a short presentation of the core readings of that, the kickoff of your practice research series. And I would say, and I cannot stress enough, that this seminar was extremely important for me to complete my PhD. So I was very lucky to have you as a supervisor, but also, supervisor that is very engaged in the discussions of practice research. I think that in that point I was really lucky. And yeah, thank you. As Agatha mentioned, I'm going to, so the frame of my presentation today is really exploring the idea of listening as a strategy for research, or as a method of research. That's the lens, that's the frame of my presentation. But I think the aim of this presentation is to, oh, the light's going off. 1 second. Oh, let's go in the dark, straight. The aim of this presentation is really to, to maybe, some ways to support or to help PhD students facing challenges and uncertainties. And I'm going to share, quite honestly, my challenge, how I overcome them, some of those, strategies that I used, and hope that it can be interesting for everyone here. I know that so many experienced researchers in this presentation. So just give me a second. I think I need to turn this light on, otherwise. Minutes.
No worries, Francisco. We can still see you quite well, but of course, make sure you're comfortable there.
This is the issue with smart buildings.
Oh my God, yes. And I have a little bit of text to read, so it's a problem to have. Okay, so listen as a strategy to navigate my practice-based research. It is, well, in terms of, just give a short context before jump on my PhD project. I'm originally from Brazil, as you can see, maybe my accent. So I came to London 10 years ago, 2015, to radically change my career, actually. I was an environmental engineer working in Brazil, have quite a successful profession in Brazil. But not really happy, so I decided to follow my passion with music composition, sound. Came to London 10 years ago, did a master's degree at London College of Communication in sound arts. And since that time, I've been working in sound for film, documentaries, especially experimental filmmaking, working with so many different independent filmmakers, as well working across modern composition, sound installation, radio art. So sound is my background. I never had in my mind, so that's something when the unexpected and the embrace the unknown is very important for me in terms of my practice, in terms of my my PhD as well, because I had no idea to do a PhD. That's not something that was in my mind at all. And unfortunately, the pandemic just, began in 2021. I lost all my freelance jobs. The filmmaking industry was, completely stuck. The art galleries closed. So there was, on that time, I was working with in a documentary called Passage. This is a feature documentary directed by a professor called Lucia Najibi, a very great scholar in film studies. And Lucia, she just planted a seed on my mind, asking me, why you don't do a PhD? So it's a good time to think about a proposal. And I think that was enough, for me, was enough in terms of motivation to sit down and start to think about research questions and think about this articulation of sound and sonic thinking in the context of documentary filmmaking. And then after a few weeks work on that, I was lucky, or maybe aware about synchronicities, and I came across with this scholarship from Stanford University, 3 years full-time scholarship. And ironically enough, the title was to work with the sonic landscape of documentary 4. I applied for that, got the scholarship, and completed my PhD in 2024, last year, 3 years and a half, with the final title of my thesis, Amplifying Ambience, Rethinking Sound as a Critical Practice in Non-Fiction Filmmaking, which, as you can see, really explored the relationship between sound, place, and non-fiction filmmaking. In other words, I was very interested in connecting the embodied experience of listening sound as a driving force for non-fiction film. Of course, there are so many discussions and so many experimental filmmaking work with creative ways of using sound in their films, but I think what's really missing on that was how to connect this sonic thinking as a strategy, as a trigger point for the research, and how they can be articulated to the whole process of filmmaking, not only in post-production. And that was almost like my initial idea of this research, which cross disciplines from anthropology of sound, documentary studies, and sound arts, practice, and discourse. Some important reference for me at the beginning of this journey was very interesting, Salome Vogelin, the political possibility of sound. Also, for example, Brando Labelle, Acoustic Territory. So those books that really explore this relationship between sound, space, and the poetic and politics of listening and sound from sound studies. And then the challenge was how to connect this with, documentary studies such as Bill Nichols, Holly Rogers, Swint Pinha, and so on, which is quite challenging for me at that time because there's some terminologies and some shared vocabularies that really didn't match, and it's totally different way to think in some ways. Like, for example, in film sound, you call location sound recording, the practice of recording sound during the shooting process, when the voice is the main point of the capture of the sound. In sound arts discourse, you called the art of field recording, when not necessarily the voice is the main point. And also, there's a lot of current discussions about this idea of capturing sounds, shooting, all those very colonial terminologies of filmmaking that in sound art has been discussed, I think, in much more interesting ways. So crossing those disciplines in terms of practice and discourse and conceptual framework was my interest in this practice research. But why listening? So, of course, in our visual-dominated culture, sound is often overlooked. Yet, as Salome Vogelin reminds us, listening can expand and critically shape how you perceive and arrange yourselves in the world. Composer Paulino Oliveiros developed the practice and concept of deep listening, a radical act of listening, a practice of opening the ears beyond hearing, tuning to the hum of the world, the noise, the physics, the breath of space, and the echo within. It invites listeners to dissolve boundaries between sound, body, and thought, transforming listening into a mode of presence, empathy, and sonic imagination. Brando Labelle's last book, Poetics of Listening, treats listening as a creative and ethical practice that actively shapes our inner life, social relationships, ecological awareness. By calling it poetics, Labelle emphasized that listening isn't passive, it's imaginative, transformative, and relational. It invites us to care, resist, and reimagine how you connect with ourselves, each other, and the world around us. So important question for me inside that kind of context was really, what am I not hearing? What's missing in that kind of sonic landscape, especially in the context of documentary filmmaking? Open question. But important in this context, just to clarify, I'm not interested in this research. I was not really interested still not interested in suppressing or replacing our visual dominated culture with listening sounds. Not that. Instead, what I was proposing was a recalibration of our sensory relations. Listen invites us to perceive the world through different lenses, offering alternative ways of seeing, sensing, and making sense of our surroundings. So it's in that kind of rationale, I would say, that I'd like to invite everyone here to listen. The first piece is a piece for Peter Cusack from his long-term project called Sound from Dangerous Place. We recorded this in 2006, long time ago, 20 years ago almost, Chernobyl power plant. Let's have a listen, and then I'm going to explore a little bit of that. So according to Peter Cusack, field recording like this one, for example, convey more than basic facts. It also transmits powerful sense of spatiality, atmosphere, and timing.
We cannot hear you very well because we can still hear the background. Sorry.
Yeah, it's fine. So now you can hear me. Yeah.
Better now, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, this what I'm interested in that piece, and that was like one of the inspiration to begin my research and go to the contextual review and try to articulate the rationale behind what I'm trying to achieve in terms of thinking sound for non-fiction films, was this idea of Peter Cusack as a sound as a powerful trigger for research. What he means by that is, for example, here you wonder why you can still hear this electricity running through the cables at Chernobyl power plant, despite it has been deactivated long time ago. And to that question prompted Cusack to investigate further and realize that actually this power plant is not entirely deactivated, it's still running electricity because they need to clean and the maintenance of that space. So this is a short and very simple example of how one sensory mode could lead to other ways of research apart from the linguistic and the ocular. Here, this unexpected fizz of electricity was the spark of a series of those research, and this aligned with this idea that listening to the environment around us can reveal more than just atmosphere, the sense of time. It can catalyze research. So basically, in that context, the idea of the centering the documentary voice, and here, documentary voice not as a just linguistic meaning, but as a structure, according to Bionicus, the whole structure mechanisms of making documentary, the whole form of the documentaries and different modes of documentaries are very supported by visible evidence and linguistic meaning in language. Of course, that's not something, it's a complex discussion. And of course, it has been for so long been discussed, like, Trinh Minh has this question, critiquing this idea of giving a voice to subjects, and there's so many filmmakers challenging those tendencies of visual evidence and linguistic meaning, use of music, and so on. But what is very interesting is the big idea and what she calls the holes in the sound wall, which means Minhao is very interested in the grains of the voice, the effects, the music, the tonality, the inflections, the pulse. Think about that, the sensory element of knowledge production. I came up with this idea that listening may be the strategy for searching this sonic space in between this linguistic meaning, visual representation, music. When I say listening here, I'm talking about the sonic environment around us. if you pay attention around us, what is in beyond the voice effects or music, this space in between that in some ways could fill up those gaps of lacunas of conventional documentary. In that kind of situation, this terminology amplify ambience emerged from my research as part of the title of my research, which I'm not going deep here, but just does not mean rising and amplifying the sound or the decibels of sound, but actually is a conceptual idea to turn our attention to what's around us and how can you do this methodologically and maybe conceptually. So moving to the practical scope of this project, Notes on Listening is a short experimental film that emerged from this research. I'm going to talk very briefly about this film in a second, but before I talk about the movie itself, was that also trying to find in literature and trying to find books that explore this idea of film project as research, and it was very difficult at that time. We didn't have Agatha's new book at that time, but I found like Eric Knudsen articles, which for me was really important reference when he argues that in order to you should see a film itself as a process, not as a product, but as a research method in itself, a way of thinking, discovering, and articulating the knowledge. And find ways to document the film process, play a role in giving access to the process. So the idea of dissemination of that knowledge. So if you think that every single film, doesn't matter if it's documentary, fiction, or experimental, involves research, I think 100% of the films. The difference is that articulation is the thinking through the making, and of course the dissemination of that original contribution to knowledge. And I think that's I started was thinking, how can I make a film that could expose the process in some ways? And also the output of this was not the documentary film, but a series of composition and websites with interviews with my collaborators and the key aspects of the method of making this film. Those are the strategies I found quite useful, but of course there's so many other ways. And actually there's a good conversation we can have after. Just a second. So Notes on Listening is a film about Peckham, a place in southeast London, a place that I'm living over the 7 years. And on that time, when I was doing my PhD, one of the big challenges that I had, two big challenges actually, massive challenge was, one is I was not a filmmaker. I came from sound background. I was working with filmmakers, but never produced a film in my life. And at that stage, I needed to produce a film as part of the open call. So the output, is to produce a documentary film in some ways, to explore some methodologies or something new. And the second challenge was in the middle of the pandemic. So how can I make a documentary or a no fiction experimental film when the embodied experience of location and the site is very important and is critical to my research? So two big challenges to face, and the third challenge, no money. So I had just scholarship, no money at all. How am I going to bring collaborators without money? So those challenges are the very, very beginning of my PhD, and of course I had so many discussions with my supervisors, Agatha and Cheryl, Mark, and they're very helpful. And you talk about the idea to have a research center when people could collaborate in the same film with different roles, for example, different research interests. That would be something fantastic, but it's still like a utopic thing, at least for now. So I need to make sure that how am I going to make this film. So Peckham was a decision for different reasons. I was living there, so it's very easy to access the location, and it's an extremely interesting place in terms of acoustic territory, in terms of the culture of sound, using sound as a cultural community aspect of living in that place. So Peckham is a place that has a huge migration from Caribbeans, Jamaicans from the 50s, and then West Africans from the 70s. And that culture of black music is on the street. Every single shop, every single market has portable speakers on the doors. And you walk into the Peckham Rye Lane and the main street of the Peckham Town Center, and you have this live mixed chaos with different languages and noises and music and African music and gospel music and church. At the same time, the train just cross this through a bridge, so it's a very loud train actually. That's the picture of the station, one of the first picture on the left, on the top. So it is a cacophony of, yeah, I was very interested in this idea of how can I explore this from three different levels, very inspired by Bruno Labelle's acoustic territories, from the ground, from the underground, and from the sky, which that's part of my thesis, and in some ways is incorporated in the documentary. So what I mean to listen to the sky in Peckham, to the radio frequency, the invisible, the poetics of that, the imaginative, what it means to listen to the sidewalks, to outdoor space, to the indoor space, to language, and to the underground, to the vibrations, the materiality of sound. One strategy that, so in the beginning of this, so I need to find, of course, I knew that it was not like a scripted documentary. I knew that I don't want to do a scripted documentary. I'm going to talk about the methodology soon, but the whole point starts with listening practice. And one of the strategies that I use is to be involved in community group discussions in Peckham. So Peckham is quite famous for community resistance and grassroots community action. One of the few places in London that you can still working a lot, and is really pushing back those, very aggressive regeneration plans in London. Some of what's happening in Elephant Castle or Lucian, if you know South London, maybe you know what I'm talking about. So in Peckham, it's very difficult for them to do. There's a plan. The plan is ready. There's a massive plan for Peckham regeneration, but those people, the communities really articulated. That was something that was interesting, but not exactly, because I think what was missing those discussions, even those community group discussions, was, part of the character of Peckham sound, sonic culture, and it's never discussed. This is, when you have the document of Peckham character, is a massive document when it involves like the economic, financial aspect, the cultural aspect, the environment aspect of Peckham, the architecture. There's a lot of buildings, important buildings in Peckham. The migration aspect, but never talk about really sound in terms of vernacular way of living that place. So apart from a few music venues in Peckham, that's very famous, but I was not interested in those music venues. I was interested in really this kind of organic way of getting together and share sound and share collective listening experience. That's something was missing. So I think Notes on Listen came from this idea of really start from listening. This is a kind of visual representation of this method I developed as a kind of just a process when listening practice really informs some field recordings technique, and then some soundscape composition, the filming strategy, and the editing strategy for this movie. But things not work in a kind of one direction, of course not. It's very intertwined, it's very chaotic. It's extremely chaotic. As an example, if I was walking, doing some listening activity in Peckham, then I have some idea for the shooting, and I asked the cinematographer to join, and you have those discussions, and then Raquel is the cinematographer, she was shooting a specific thing, like, I don't know, a still image. And then after that, I have trigger ideas for the editing, then come back to the listening, and then the field recording, trigger field recording. So it's a very complicated process, which puts me on another challenge in terms of research. That is, first, listening is ephemeral. As soon as listening is gone, it's vanished. So you cannot grasp listening. You cannot catalog. You cannot put then categories. Well, you can, but you cannot transform listening in something that is visually represented in some ways. You can, but I don't want to do that. And so one way is, of course, field recording is a way to collect that data, to analyze that data in terms of editing, in terms of creative process. But on the very beginning, I was not really comfortable with that. I think I really need to, do something to materialize that listening experience in something like that could be more like repeatable, or not repeatable, but there's another word for that, reliable. So listening is not a reliable practice. It's very subjective, is relational. It's the contingent of the moment that defines our listening, and it's very personal. So that first idea of trying to do like a sonic map of Beckham was a terrible mistake from my side, I think. And I realized that very soon because I don't want to visualize my listening experience. I don't want to put that in maps and categories in this kind of discourse, very used in acoustic ecology, for example, try to make listening sound scientifically approved for, I don't know, any kind of community of research. And I was much more interested in, for example, this type of diary, what I call auto-reflexivity, which means every single time I went to the location, to the site, to the place, I was writing few sentences, few paragraphs about my experience. And that was, for me, really helpful to articulate, to make sense what I was doing and to find strategy to make this documentary. Here's just a short example of that. When I enter an acoustic space that constantly changes, a sonorous picture encompasses a mixture of artificial, mechanical, and natural sounds pushing and tugging at each other, turning into a generative urban soundscape heard from the streets of Pecan. A superposition of sound incidents that flow in the continuous vibration of frequency. Background became foreground and back again, in a shift energy of amplification and breakdowns that move in and out throughout the waves in the air, vibrations on surface. So just this type of diary then also was articulated with a series of soundscape and compositions and field recordings, which then, the very beginning of my, well, not very beginning, but even before I start really to work on the post-production of this movie, or even start to film actually, I published this audio paper at a journal called More Than Backgrounds, a peer review audio paper, which really, trying to make sense of what I was doing, what kind of questions I was asking at that time, and what kind of, how the editing, the diaries, the press of field recording, using different types of microphone, different techniques, could inform what's going on in Pecan in terms of community resistance, in terms of the culture of sonic culture of that place. Let's play. I think it's nice to play just 4 minutes of this. It's quite long, but just to give a sense of those recordings and some of those questions. Let me know, Agatha, if there's no sound. I think it should be fine.
Will literally prevent them from enforcing the legislation that has been created to force landlords to look after their properties. This is absolutely outrageous.
Yeah, but it's outrageous. It's more outrageous than you realise, because now the government is saying we're going to introduce a new system of very low.
Are you going?
And I know we'll colour it out. All tight now in the chat room every time. What you mean?
According to the most recent census, Pecan is now designated as a hybrid layered community area, indicating that it is one of the most ethnically diverse areas in the UK. The Southeast London borough overlays a vast number of different cultural identities, which can be easily felt on its streets. This audio paper explores the physical acoustic space of Pecan High Street through my sonic journey as a Pecan resident, sonic practitioner and researcher. In balancing community activism with the urgent necessity of communicating places and sounds on the edge of gentrification, displacement, and disappearance, Pecan's High Street sonic materiality also vibrates to my idiosyncratic position, the one which can be expanded into a broader socio-political dimension, which also resonates with Eileen Kuhn's reflection on the last Pecan Vision meeting, held in November 2022 at Pecan levels. The event placed together people from different sectors of society to reflect and debate the role of community grassroots action in London. Here, amplifying ambience became a methodological tool and critical framework to infuse sonic thinking and sensibilities into debate about urban space and community activism, in response to the new regeneration plan spreading fast around London. However, it also explores an imaginative sonic space where a site of resistance, defined by its own cultures and social relations, can emerge, managed by language, sound, and music. A cosmopolitical vibration. I'm quoting here Marcus Boom from the book The Politics of Vibration, 2022, which highlights the role that sound and vibration play in creating and reinforcing cultural and social identities, as well as the ways in which they can be used to contest, subvert, or resist dominant power structures. So, if you can call this urban sonic environment as a form of acoustic resistance, so then how can listening be incorporated in community activism as a reflective strategy? And how can the agents of acoustic environment be articulated on those reflections?
Well, as you know, I'm just recovering from several months, in fact, of thinking about this and slowly bringing people together. From what I had in my mind was that I'd like to bring the whole system into the room, the whole system of human beings and institutions that are involved in how we manage and develop the urban life in London, because that's where I'm working, but of course it applies much more widely than that. What I've observed is that there's a gap of communication between the actors in the different parts of the system, which is unnecessary and dangerous, and I want to change that.
Okay, let's come back to the screen. Yeah, it's 13 long, so for time restrictions, let's move forward. Yeah, so those are, I would say, the series of listening, field recording, sound composition, editing, thinking through, writing, publishing. There are ways for me to think about the, how could I incorporate sonic thinking and sonic sensibility in the film editing, the film process itself. And that's a big discussion as part of one of my chapters. I'm not going deep here, but just to give like some sense what's happened. Some of those materials, the sonic material, the diaries and footage was sent to the editor called Tatiana Germano. And she was, for the first time, working the other way around. So without a script, actually, started to think it through sound to create a kind of structural narrative for that film. And of course, there's a lot of challenge on that. One of the big challenges is that what Mark Peter Wright called the plurality of signals. That is, the diffusive capacity of sound, or hear different layers of sound at the same time, is diffusive, is simultaneously you hear that. And because of that kind of characteristic, make it very difficult to talk about just one subject, very difficult to explore one specific narrative. So one of the decisions you had is really let it go, let it develop itself and see what kind of structure is going to emerge from that process. And here's just like, I'm going to play 3 minutes just to give a sense of her struggles and her ideas on this editing process, because she was a very experienced editor, but for the first time she was like, wow, I don't know what to do. You need to think together. I think that's a kind of collaboration in terms of reflection as well.
The whole process of editing was very different from what I'm used to. Since you told me about what the project was going to be, my first tries with the footage would be like, I remember I was trying something like a black and white image, and I would like highlight people passing or something that would draw my attention to the sound in color. But then I realized I was too attached to the image still. And the whole process of editing was a little bit like listen to music, because it's something that I really like to do. And I reminded that when I'm working or writing or something that I can't listen to music as well, what usually happens is I can't concentrate because music takes me away to somewhere else. And I thought that what should be with the editing. For example, for instead of highlighting or thinking a lot about the image, I was always trying to think what you will be doing with the sound, because my point was in this whole imagery with people passing and steps on the ground and baby crying, people talking, each person would have a different point of view, something that will call their attention. So it will be more freely with the image, because with the whole soundscape. For example, I would look for somebody passing in a bike, but maybe somebody else will be looking to the train passing. So it would be something much more free than just thinking about image. So I had to let go of the image and think about the sound. So I went over the footage again, instead of thinking of highlighting something or doing something else. I just thought I would use my experience as if I am a spectator. I'm a viewer looking at this, because I needed.
Right. So again, time restriction. I need to move forward. But
it's okay, Francis. So you can be we're fine with time. You don't need to finish at past. It's okay. Yeah.
Amazing. Okay. Right. Yeah. Let's move forward. Yeah. So that's a kind of this type of strategy was also used on the cinematograph. I'm not exploring here, but the same type of dialogic. I'm calling it dialogic editing, dialogic filming through sound, because it's much more a conversation with the collaborators than me as a kind of director, saying that what to do. So there's no this kind of hierarchical decisions came from really conversations, dialogic process. Although, of course, the last decision was made by myself because of the research, I was the PhD researcher. So, but with Tati, for example, we have so many different conversations, and after I don't know how many cuts, potentially over 25 or even more than that, something started to happen on this process, and something started to emerge. I would say not organically, because there's a reason why it emerged, but I was not expecting that. I was surprised. Again, come back to the idea of embracing the unknown, the unexpected, the serendipity of things, especially in practice research. So the chaos start to make sense. Even in a poetic sense in some ways, or not really a, scientific sense, but start to make that kind of a discursive sense as well, and sensory sense, I would say, the perceptual sense of things. So what I mean by that is try to find that in 50 minutes or almost 1 hour film, there's some elements of that movie that's not in order, that was dialoguing in a specific context of framework, and then came across these 2 different acts of listening, or 2 different acts of the film. Just to give an example, so the first one, entering the acoustic territory, was really the first experiment I was conducting. So during my research, a series of different experiments that are called phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, and so on. One of the first experiments was this idea of using the simultaneity of sound, this idea of diffusing cafat of sound to challenge in some ways the historical gaze in documentary. In that sense, was really interesting. If the camera was still, the sound was moving around. If the camera was moving around, the sound could move around as well, but could be still. So I was exploring sound around and beyond the camera. using different types of microphone. One of them, for example, was binaural microphone that is, give a very special quality of sound, a very 3D quality, let's say. But also using, binaural is very important for this first act, for example. So there's a technique that was used that was then connected in the whole film, but not only technique, there is also conceptual idea. That is what it means by, diffusive capacity of sound. So then I start to make clear, actually a little bit of more sense for me to write about that. So I knew that that could be something, to write about in terms of method, in terms of conceptual framework. Act 2, for example, the film Acoustics of Resistance, explores the idea of politics of vibration, dissonance between the sound and image. Is a little bit more radical. It's really a disassociation between what you see, what you hear in some ways, at some point of the disruption of those things. It's not something new. For example, Michel Chon, so many, scholars that talk about audiovisual relationship has explored before. But from that context of this documentary film, it's not like a audiovisual relation decision. It's something that happened because of the process of listening into the field. So the embodied experience of listening informed the creative strategies on the post-production, which, again, connect with some techniques I used, but also some conceptual framework. Okay. And the third act is this idea of grasping the inaudible was, again, a series of experiments that was exploring the vibrational and the materiality of sound. So what's beyond human frequency capacity of hearing, that is beyond or below 20 hertz and 20 kilohertz, using different types of microphone like contact microphone, gelphonic, radio frequency. I use this technique to record those vibrations, but also that connected to some conceptual idea of materiality of sound from Carlyle, Peter Reich, and Burst Whistle, and so many different theoretical frameworks. So this again, so how those techniques, the new way of thinking about the method, about the making of that film, connect with some conceptual ideas, and then come back to the idea of crossing disciplines from sound art, sound studies, anthropology of sound, and documentary filmmaking. Let's play just, I think you have some, I still have time, so that's good. Let's play just a short extract of each of those different acts to give a sense what I'm talking about. For this one, if you can use a headphone, it would be really great because of this binaural effect. Otherwise, not going to feel that. Any kind of headphones will work. Yeah, just a short extract from Act 1. So that's that idea of diffusing what you hear, what you see, and what Tati was saying about the fragmentation of the image in order to respond to the soundscapes that is simultaneous, that is diffusive. The second act, it's a short extract.
Your name is above every name. At the name of Jesus, every knee shall bow, every knee will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. So I exalt you.
Yeah, just short extract from Act 2. This is, again, coming to the idea of the technique that I used, some of those techniques, for example, removing frequency, future, some low and middle frequency, was actually responding to not only a static proposition, but actually responded to this idea of removal of the community. What's left when remove the community? And the low frequency represented this idea of, low frequency could transpass barriers and walls. So the very low frequency could resist more than the high and the medium frequency. And those kind of decisions are really informed by this idea, come back to the idea of ways of thinking through sound and the image relationship. And also this idea of what you can see, so the localization of sound, you see something, but you are here inside that place, like the church. And there's a lot of those techniques being used as well. So the sound is not attached to the camera. It has like a kind of agents that is not superior, not really, but just like there are different entities working together, which is very interesting, this type of mechanisms. And that's the technique, but also come back to the theoretical conceptual framework with what that means, the politics of vibration in the context of Peckham, black music and resistance and this kind of thing. Then there's a lot to write about that. So this kind of articulation between the practice, the method, and the theoretical frame. And the last act is, again, just a very short extract from this, but that's when we explore this inaudible aspect that for human beings. Yeah, so the third act as, again, technique using different microphones like contact, gel phone, but then what means the materiality of sound, the material quality of sound on the screen, the vibration, the frequency, we can go for more like philosophical discussions of that. That's not the point here, but then the idea of new materialism, all those things could come through those discussions. So yeah, that's also part of the culture, the acoustic territory of PEC. It's not all about human beings, community, but also the non-human activities and the vibrations and infrastructures that play a role on your well-being, basically. We experience them even if we cannot hear it for years. And so just trying to, I think, I want to leave space for discussion. So just try to synthesize some of those yeah, the point of this presentation. For me, on the left side, you can see this picture is a little bit of the process, the chaotic process of trying to make sense of the editing of this movie, trying to organize things, find the structure. So it's taking a long time. And it's very, very, there's a huge sense of anxiety, actually, for my part, for the editor, everyone involved in this project, because we are trying to make sense of this, the process itself. But I would say, if there's something I can say, well, is that like as a practitioner, you need to be a little bit confident that there is something beyond our capacity to see on that time, on that specific point in time, that is going to emerge at some point. That's what I think what's beautiful about research, especially practice research. You need to, in some ways, be confident that on the mystery of this practice that is going to emerge. Of course, you need to work hard, you need to come back to the research, do your practice, do your experiment. So for me, this figure 8 represents very well this intersection between experimentation, practice, and the research. When, for example, the research provide knowledge for the creative practice, of course, but also the creative practice provide knowledge to the research. And if you see, like, in terms of academic context and artistic practice, I think is exactly the same applies. So the history of art practice provides lots of knowledge for the academic setting. At the same time that, so many artists are doing PhD and try to increase their knowledge on the practice. So I think that's a kind of very, very difficult to separate those things. I don't think there's any way you can try to do that. Otherwise, you come back to the categorization, labeling, and the scientific point of view. So it's basically embracing the scales in some ways that to rigour and consistency, something is going to emerge, and things need a little bit of time to make sense. And then the challenge is how to write about those things, because the chaotic process of this method, for example, doesn't really align with the line-by-line aspect of writing, sentence by sentence, paragraph by paragraph. How am I going to translate those process that's intertwined into a paper? But that's possible. Yeah, I think I'd like to finish here just to give space for conversation, and thank you very much.
That was wonderful, Francisco. Thank you so much. So I am so happy there's so many people in the room, and I think there's already something in the chat, which I will read the questions about. I will read the questions in a second, and I know there's some hand up, but just maybe I take. If that's okay, I'm just going to ask one first question and then open it to public. So, and just to give people the background, it was just really such a pleasure to work with Francisco, and I'd like to hear a little bit more about your process as a PhD student for the benefit of the people in the audience. But I hope you don't mind me sharing a couple of insights from my side. So it was really and I'm sure that everyone who supervises PhD will relate to that. So Francisco, at the beginning of his journey, came to me and says, look, yeah, so how do I do it? Like, how am I supposed to make that film? And this is when I started laughing. It's like, well, you need to figure it out, And I think probably I terrified you at the beginning when you realized I'm not going to give you an easy answer. But what I did tell you, I don't know if you remember that, is that, your PhD seems to be a PhD where you're going to be devising your own methodologies, and that's going to be your original contribution to knowledge. And I think this is when you started digging. And it was just so interesting to hear you talk today about this idea of, moments which were very chaotic, both in terms of, you trying to figure out what is the way for you to find the way to make it, but also in terms of conceptualizing what you're trying to do from research perspective, how to find a way to just make it coherent, and how to really, very often, all you needed is a kind of trust that, given the huge amount of work you put into trying to contextualize and understand what you're doing and collaborating with amazing people you collaborated with, that at some point something will actually emerge from that chaos. And it was just really interesting to hear you talk, like, after edit number 23 or 24, suddenly started happening. And I think And, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think very often, and probably there will be lots of people in the room who just, ask about that, creative practice PhDs very often rely on this trust that when you put enough work into understanding your context, into really trying to push yourself beyond the obvious, something will happen. And that's the biggest value in that, because if I had told you at the beginning, well, you're going to do it this way and that way, there will be very little scope for you to actually discover something and just create something which is really different and really of a huge value, really. Because if you knew what the recipe is, you just cook the same meal, but you devising a brand new meal, you're devising a brand new dish. So I wonder if you have any comment about that. I would be really interested to hear from your perspective now, once you've just finished and you're about to start supervising your own PhDs.
Yeah, thank you, Agatha. Yes, yeah. If I have some thoughts on that, a few thoughts. I think first, well, it was quite scary. I agree. When I started my PhD, I was really scared. I need to confess, because I didn't plan to do a PhD. I was like embarking on a journey, like what I'm doing. And I think there's something about the scientific world, like, I came from science as well because I did the engineering. So the way of thinking, the methods are there. They're developed, they're tested, they're reliable. Some ways it's kind of easy because you need to just select the method and try and test. I'm not say generalizing, but in creative practice research, you need to develop our methods. There's nothing really, you can use methods from social science, whatever, interviews, anyway, ethnography. But you still need to develop something. I think you still need to find a way to articulate those methods according to your questions, your aims on the research. And this is a little bit scary because you don't know if it's going to fail. I have so many different fails in this process, actually. And it's okay, but, in the end of the day, you need to have a thesis, you need to go for a viva, and have progress reviews. It is scary, but I think from my experience, at least from after the second year, I would say when I start to make things, because I think the first, 6-7 months is really into the literary review and writing, try to understand what is practice research. And I think when you start to connect the practical element with the theoretical element and things start to make sense, there's a kind of confidence that also emerge, from me at least, start to emerge from the second year, I think. I think that's my thought. So there's something about our practice. If you know it's your practice. My practice is sound. I know more about sound and filmmaking, so I need to develop further and find out what I don't know. And it's very interesting, this idea of I'm not mastering this skill. So that's still open for the learning process. And I think this learning process is important, and it's going to take you to another layer or another stage, I would say. Not sure if I answer your question, Agatha, but yes.
You have. And, it's very interesting. Also, like one of the citations you used from Eric for today's presentation was about embracing the process as a form of, as a journey, really. So filmmaking, in this case, what he was writing about is this process of discovery as well. So we have a couple of questions in the chat, but I think I'm going to ask Kelly, who has her hand up first, to ask her question. If you want to unmute yourself, Kelly, and ask your question, and then I'm going to read the questions from the chat. So Kelly, if you'd like to go first.
Hi, everybody. I was writing down a lot of notes as I was listening to you, Francisco, and was really interested. I'm coming from a point of view where I'm also, I'm a PhD candidate at the moment doing creative practice, and I'm looking at a list of BFI films, and we'll be making a docudrama in relation to that. But I used to be a university lecturer many moons ago, and then became a filmmaker. Well, I didn't become, I was already a filmmaker, but I went freelance as a filmmaker and thought, do you know what, I'm never going to do a PhD. I don't want to do it. And then this PhD came along and I was like, damn, really want to do this. But as I was listening to you, I was wondering, did you use Christian Metz in your work? I know it's really old, his writing, and I can't remember when he published, but I used to use that work quite a long time ago.
Do you remember the work?
Christian Metz, he wrote a book called, I think it was called The Semiotics of Film Sound. It was quite a long time ago.
Oh, right.
I used to co-teach a second year undergrad module called Image, Music, Sound. And I used to just come in, the rest of it was all about like musicals and things like that. And I used to come in and teach about sound design and 5.1 and come at it from a kind of filmmaker's point of view. And Metz used to talk an awful lot about sound semiotics, talking about the linguistics of sound, the meaning of sound, sound as language. And I thought you were somewhat discussing cultural communication with sound. And I found that really interesting because to talk about sound is actually really difficult. And to use language in sound is really difficult because I'm a filmmaker and I find it really easy to talk about image in language. It's not a complex thing to do. We have mise en scène to be able to sort of discuss that. But I've always been really fascinated by sound because as a director, obviously I'm very image focused and I struggled to describe sound because when we say, for example, a bee buzzes, a bee doesn't actually make the sound buzz. It's just a word that we use to describe the sound, if you see what I mean. And so I've always been obsessed as a director with manipulating sound and manipulating my audience with sound, which gives meaning for sound and how Metz would say sound can be used for emotion. And so because of that, I'm one of those sort of rare directors, I guess, that's obsessed with sound in fiction work because it can sway emotions and it can give meaning to the images. And I saw that somewhat in your experimental work. And so when I was watching and hearing your work in Peking, it gave me a strong connection with communication, with language, poetics, and experimenting with sound communication in a specific culture. And so I was interested in what you think about that in relation to your work, in relation to cultural sound communication, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. Thank you, Kelly. There's a lot here in your comment. Thank you very much. Really interesting. I'm going to split in two different, because I think you touched on two different very important points. This is how directors communicate sound is extremely interesting. But I'm going to talk first about the semiotic aspect. So yes, there's some, in the beginning of my research, I was quite interested in the semiotic element of sound in terms of signal and language itself. But the point is, most of the studies in film sound, they take this approach. So they're trying to decode the audiovisual relationship, like Michel Chion, even Walter Murch, Birth Whistle, Holly Rogers, for example, if you heard the idea of sonic elongation, when the railroad sounds on the images, detached from the images, start to become kind of a concrete muse composition. And there's a lot of the semiotic analysis on those things. So I was not really, I want to go to the other direction, actually. It's still connected with the communication, cultural communication, totally. But for the direction of the embodied experience of sound from the location. And because I was talking about no-fiction filmmaking, specifically documentary films that are part of our social, political, ecological reality in some ways. So it's very interesting, this articulation, that I think that's a kind of big gap in the literature, or in the practice even, how to translate or articulate, I would say, this embodied experience, a phenomenological experience of sound and listening through the process of making the documentary. Of course, that could be like a second research, because now I have like the film, there's a lot to talk about those decisions. I mentioned about those creative decisions and ways of communicating the audiovisual relationship on each act of the film. But that could be a different thesis, because there's so many to talk about that, and go to the semiotic aspect. It would be like so complex. I think I decided to frame my research in this more like, let's come again to not to the semiotic aspect of sound, but the embodied aspect of sound. So more like phenomenological framework, I would say.
I think as I was watching and listening to some of the clips, I very much felt like there was a cultural language there in the sound, if that makes sense, because you talk about, you look at creating sound systems, for example, is very much a part of Peckham, but it's also very much a part of lots of places in the UK. Yeah, like creating sound systems is a culture and it is a language as well, to a certain extent. And I just thought there was a really interesting kind of theoretical component to that, I guess.
Yeah, and that came to the politics of vibration I was talking about. There's a book called the Politics of Vibration, one of the books that I was interested. That's not really about semiotics, but really about this cultural relationship with sharing sound in community space, what that means for Black culture in terms of living in the space, especially from, Caribbeans and Africa, because there is this idea, well, anyway, it's kind of complex, but there is this idea of sharing the space, is create a community of shared listening that is, in some ways, if you go to a place that when the gentrification just came through aggressively and changed completely the community, and that's a very interesting exercise. Try to listen to those places, like, I don't know, Chelsea, whatever, and go to the places when there is this kind of mix of, different nationalities and even Black people living together. So there's the way they use the technology and the apparatus of sound technology is almost like reappropriated in a way, like is reinvented in order to share and to create the community space. But what that's community space? So it's a long discussion. I'm not going to that. But what's behind sound system in terms of reggae, dub? So the idea of vibration on the body and make everything the same symphony, the same align with, in order for everyone try to dance together. And this is a kind of, you go to this almost like cosmological point of view. That is, there's a energy that is calibrating the community in some ways. I'm just saying that there is, again, the embodied part of that. I think for me was more interesting in the semiotic aspect, but for the context of this research, I'm not saying that. And definitely I'm going to have a look on the book you mentioned.
I mean,
but
it's
I think
really
that would be
old.
like more related. Yeah.
I can't remember when it was published, and it was one of those ones. I mean, I was teaching it probably 10 or 15 years ago, so it was old then. So I've got no idea how old it is. But the theoretical concept always sort of stuck with me, given linguistics of sound, to talk about sound or to give language to sound when it's really difficult to actually describe. I always thought was a really interesting concept, and something resonated when I was watching your work. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. I'm aware there's plenty of questions in the chat, so if that's okay, I'm going to address them very quickly. Hopefully we can have enough time for that. So first of all, we have Simon. Welcome, Simon, who's going to start his PhD here at Staffs in September. Hi. I don't know if you prefer to unmute yourself and ask the question, or would you rather I read it from the chat?
I'm happy. I didn't know how you were running the end, so thank you very much for today. I'll go back to my question because it's easier. I've written it down, but I commenced a performing arts practice-based PhD in September with Staffordshire, and it's a mix between bringing performing arts into education far earlier to make candidates far better employees once they get into the workplace. So that's what I'll be working on using my performing arts background. So I had 3 questions there. Was your PhD distance or in person? Do you want me to do them separately or together?
You can do together. Ask me the question.
Okay.
I try to cover.
You can see them, and then the first one was what was your PhD in distance or in person? The second one, whilst I'm collecting my creative data, would you recommend this being visually recorded so I make a film of my practice space, or audibly recorded like I did for my master's, which is then a podcast journey to complement my written submission? And also, what was your word count, being that you were practice-based rather than just a normal thesis? They're my questions. Thank you.
Okay, good. Let's go for the practical one. So the first question, yes, I made my almost 3 years in distance from London. I was living in London at that time, so most of the time. So I used the campus for the facilities. Amazing at Stafford. I think there's amazing studios, facilities. So. And some meetings with Agatha as well, but most of the time, very expensive to travel, to be honest. I think because of the nature of my research, I don't feel the necessity to be on the campus. But if you have this opportunity, I think enjoy it. I think take the most as you can. In terms of the written element, I think was 50,000 or 40,000, I think. 4,000 words plus the artifacts, the portfolio. I'm not sure about the regulation. Can go
Yeah, it's
beyond
40,000 at staffs normally. Yes.
Yeah. And the second question about the well, that's again, I'm going to to shadow Agatha when I ask these questions to her when I start my PhD. That's it's very personal decision. I cannot say to you. It depends of your research. I think, the questions you need to ask is what's the benefits of using for your research of using visual encoded format or just audio, and ask those questions. What's the benefit? What's the pros and cons? It's not like a easy answer. I cannot say, unfortunately, I cannot give you any direction. But both methods for me sounds okay. So visually or podcasts, they're totally different, of course, in terms of how you're going to not only write about that, but there are different sensory modes. So the podcast has the element of not visual element on that. So, but depend of your research. So I don't know your research.
I'm happy to chip in here if that's helpful, Francisco. And I just realized I raised my hand up while I'm actually chairing this meeting, which is very polite of me. So I think the difference in terms of your question, Simon, is you're asking about data collection. Now, obviously, when you think about practice-based research or creative practice research, it's not about data collection as much as it's about generating knowledge through practice. Yes. So data collection is slightly other things. So I don't know if this is what you're asking about, because obviously in Francisco's case, I'm sorry, Francisco, I'm talking on your behalf, but in general, with this kind of things, your practice is a way through which your original contribution to knowledge gets generated rather than just data collection. So Francisco did lots of exercises, some of which he talked about, where he was doing all sorts of data collection as a way of preparing for his process. So if you said that you were working with with performance, what do you mean here? Do you mean, like, obviously, I presume your final kind of practice will be performance rather than film or a podcast? Am I understanding that correctly?
I think initially within my first year, only having obviously initial conversations with my main supervisor, is that I will be speaking to a number of businesses in relation to what they want from their candidates that they're not getting at the moment, to see where there's work that needs to be done. So obviously those I would normally think about audio recording, but obviously it would probably be later down the line, once you've made those connections, that you could then film them, because obviously you're putting them together in a slightly different way. So it was really asking to record that data, should that be visual or audio? But initially, I don't know if it should be, by what you're saying, it should be video, because you're just having a normal conversation initially, but recording it, so you might want to use it within a podcast and talk about the conversations you've had rather than the video with the person. Yeah. I may have answered my own question.
I don't know what Francisco has to say, but from my perspective, you're talking about such a different thing to what is the actual final practice. So really, I think I would completely agree with what Francisco said. It's whatever works for you, because we are talking about data collection here. So it could be really anything. I highly recommend Nicole's book on writing research journals, which talks about different. It really is a very useful one about talking about different way of capturing, journaling about your research processes. Really nice one.
Can you put that in the chat for us so I can pick up the link? That book, the book you were just talking about.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
So and I think, Simon, just to complement it very short, I think you also can think about mixed methods of research, right, Simon? Think about that. So you can use a combination of those methods. I think that's, I don't know, just keep that in mind. There's some lot of books about that.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Lovely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Simon. Chiara, I'm going to take your question in a second. I'm just going to very quickly go through the questions in the chat before that, if that's okay. So we have Eduardo, whom I thought is, Eduardo, if you prefer to unmute yourself, that's fine. If not, I'm happy to read what you have here. So Eduardo said, fantastic work, Francisco. I was wondering if there was a clear division between a collection of sonic data, as in methodologies used in such recordings, and the final output you wanted from your work. I'm thinking if at any point you consider the influence of new approaches to sound, like object-based sound, Dolby Atmos, and other immersive techniques, and if so, did that change your recording approaches when gathering your sound palette? Hope this makes sense, and thank you again for your contribution.
Right. I'm just reading to understand. Yes. Okay, I think I get it. So yes, definitely there is a connection. Yes, that's a very interesting question as well, because this whole movie, Notes on Listening, was mixed in Dolby Atmos, and was not like I would say again, not because when the beginning of my research and the data collection or data generation, I was thinking about the mixing. I was not thinking about that yet. But that emerged from the process. So how can I translate, technically speaking, the binaural recording? It's a very technical topic, but anyway, binaural recording into speakers is difficult. That's one of the reasons in cinema, in filmmaking, you don't use binaural so much, or even don't use at all, because the only way you can hear the binaural quality is using headphones. So the technique I use was, I have a help with a sound engineer, a very experienced mixer. Then you decode these stereo binaural sounds and the mono sounds into objects, into Dolby Atmos, and then exporting in, I don't remember now. Yeah, one version is stereo binaural for online experience, another for theater screening. That is a binaural Dolby Atmos mixing. So try to answer a question. I was not thinking about that since the beginning of my project. That's something that emerged, and that's a kind of problem and challenge that I need to face, a technical challenge that I need to face in the end of my research. And I think that's really important, interesting question, because then it come back to the idea of how the research itself. So I spent years making this short film. Of course, I want to put that film in festivals. Of course, I want to, show that film, but I need to make sure that we need to get the right standards. So I was doing something different, something not really used to do in the industry, in terms of techniques of recording and so on, or detaching from the camera. And then I need to pay the price for that. The price was to find technical ways to adapt back to the industry. Otherwise, in some ways, a little bit of disruption, but I don't know if that's clear, but there's a connection between what I did in terms of binaural sounds and data collection or data generation. And then that reflects on the mixing process, definitely.
Thank you, Francisco. So I'm aware that we have Chiara and at least 2 more questions in the chat. So I will have to make sure we get to all of it. So let's try to be brief, I'm afraid. So Chiara, would you like to go first?
Jump in the queue. Mine is simple because I don't come from the technical thing. So it's I'm doing research with rigour, and I'm using sometimes sound because I come from community radio for recording, and listening is part of my practice. And so I was wondering whether you've reflected on the role of mediation of technology between you and the sounds you hear. And how you treated that, because for me I was quite uncomfortable to start with, and then I realized it provided a completely different perceptual space. So I don't know, I'm not sure whether to consider an active participant on the research or whatever, but I was wondering whether you reflected on that.
Yeah, okay, shut up. Yeah, I think I got your question. Yeah, there's yes, I reflect on that, and that's a big crisis for me actually. There's a little bit of crisis because in the end of the day, there's not a film about community engagement, grassroots. So you can see that's not those discussions and those participation in the community was part of my research process, but was not in the screen. That's a decision that I took. I don't want to expose this type of conversation on the film. I was not feeling comfortable because I didn't have time really to do the amount of workshops and collective listening that I want to do. So at some point in my research, I decided to really embrace this idea of idiosyncrasies. This is my subjectivity of listening. And assuming that this is my point of view in listening to that film, and my collaborators. And it's not about community engagement in a sense, like an objective sense. So that makes me feel a little bit more comfortable. But there is a kind of questions of ethics of recording, of course. So when I was using binaural microphone, you need to be very careful. I was very careful to don't record voice. because no one knows. I mean, was using microphones on my ears, so it's a very unethical thing to do, the same as camera. So I was very careful with those things. And there's always problems of recording. I think in terms of the apparatus, all the equipments, recording equipments, as I mentioned before in my presentation, the vocabulary of those are based on this kind of strange language, very global north colonial language of capturing, shooting, capturing sound, what that means, capturing people's sounds and use it for your work. Of course, there's a lot of ethical dilemmas that I write a little bit about that on my dissertation. And I'm reflecting on those dilemmas and lots of decisions, lots of cuts on my film when I see that some voice, just leak on the microphone and they are not aware they have been recorded. So I decided to remove from the film. I don't know if you have any specific example to give, maybe, or in your work, how you do the recordings in terms of participation. There's no participation of the community because in the end of the day, there's a film about my own experience, but I'm quite interested to hear.
Yeah, no, mine is different because I'm actually working, I consider river as part of my research, like assuming the river is living. So like an indigenous type of thinking, which makes it even harder because communication does not happen through voice, not in the same way. So I'm trying to work out, and what you listen to, it's not just sound. And one of the issues or the limitations of the microphone is, even if I was to use hydrophones or contact mics, there is a listening that goes beyond the sound. And so how to capture that, it's, well, I haven't worked it out yet, but that's one of the questions that I have.
There's a book, potentially you know about this, Dylan Robinson, Hungry Listening. Have you heard about this book? It's really interesting. I can drop in the chat. Dylan Robinson, Hungry Listening is, I think you're going to be very useful. It's all about that, this idea of capturing sound, the colonial idea of going there and this hungry listening of capturing things through the listening perspective. And of course, the indigenous community had, I'm saying that because I was involved in a community indigenous project from Brazil, and I've so many conversations with shamans, and the way they listen is more cosmological. It's not about just here. It's a complicated thing. But this book, Hungry Listening from Dylan Robinson is fantastic. I think he's indigenous, part of indigenous communities, an academic as well from Canada, and it's all about those discussions. I think ethical discussions of listening, and yeah.
Thank you so much, Chiara. So, Francisco, I think we're going to have to limit it to 1 minute long responses because we're running out of time right now. So, Kenneth, I don't know if you want to unmute yourself. I'm happy to read what you said. So, Kenneth said, Francisco, the brilliant way to look at the world or listen to the world. Sound is definitely 75% of the picture, I think, maybe more. Thinking about recalibration in a visual-dominated culture and several different layers existing simultaneously as opposed to a single story. Great points. Thank you. Did you ruminate on how men and women and other people experience sound differently during your research journey?
No. Gender, no, I don't. It's not part of. It will be another thesis, I think.
Very interesting question, though.
Yeah, but it's a very interesting question. I think that's a very interesting research to be done in terms of gender, and yeah, but not for my work. Well, not in terms of writing, but of course those discussions are there because all my collaborators are basically women. So the editor, she's Tati. Of course, having this conversation intuitively is two different perspectives in terms of gender, but yeah, not in a direct way.
Yeah. I don't know if you want to add something, Kenneth, because I can see that you unmuted yourself.
Yeah, thank you very much, Francisco. And if that's the case, then how did it affect your self-reflexive position? How did it colour your own position in relation to everything you were hearing and experiencing?
I'm not sure if I can answer that question, Grant. The only way I can listen is to myself, to my body. I cannot really listen to other people. I can listen to and with others, towards others, but not can listen by others. I don't know. I'm not sure. Yeah, if I can answer a question, is just that's a perspective. I think one way I want to expand this research, and that's something I want to do, is involving collective listening experience, and that can be something to explore. But that's a future research. I didn't have time enough to really do enough workshops and explore and reflect about what I mean by collective, different social class, different genders. The collective discussions of listening for this project. But I'm very interested in the pedagogy of listening for collective, use of listening.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. I know you haven't got much time. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenneth. And I think that question leads quite nicely to the final thing we can address very quickly. So again, Michelle, I think you're still here. I've seen you here before. So Michelle says, when you're teaching sensitivity of sound to beginners, can you share a practical in-class exercise?
Yeah, I just want to pick your brains, Francisco. It's absolutely boldly expressed. Yeah.
So can you just repeat the question,
Yeah, it's in a chat, Francisco. So Michelle, well, I don't know, Michelle, do you want to ask it?
Yeah, it's I'm interested in ways of kind of sensitizing students to sound in perhaps ways that they just haven't even thought about before. Just a practical exercise in an in-class situation. Send them out into the street and whatever. I don't know. There's so many.
I just very quickly recommend to have a look on Pauline Oliveira's books about deep listening. There's so many exercises, very simple ones to do collectively with students.
Could you put that in the chat, please? Yeah. Sorry. That's great. That's enough, Agatha. If you need to stop the whole thing, I'm happy with that.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Michelle. And I think there's another person saying they're really interested in that answer. So wonderful. And it's 5 o'clock sharp. So we're perfectly on time. So I just wanted to say massive thank you, Francisco. It's just genuinely a pleasure to have you here today. And thank you everyone who came here this afternoon. I know it's a very busy period, so I really appreciate your questions and conversations. Really lovely seminar. So I'm gonna do my best to publish it by the end of today. And as I said, this is the last one in this academic year, so we'll resume in October. So enjoy your summer, everyone. Hope everyone finds some time to rest and just do all the good things we enjoy. So once again, thank you and enjoy your summer, everyone. Thank you, Francisco.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Agatha.
Bye.
Thank you very much, everyone. Bye.
Bye.